All right, so you heard him say that the state funding is enough to pursue research for stem cells because under the Dickey Amendment, they are able to actually research embryonic stem cells. We are still in order to develop cures for diseases, that federal funding for stem cell research must be present. States alone cannot support stem cells research without federal help. Joanne Morrison of the Coalition for the Advancement of Medical Research states that it is difficult to think back on any major scientific breakthrough that has been funded by state money alone. And Jonathan Moreno, Center for American Progress, states that states have made valiant attempts to advance stem cell research, but they cannot replace federal support. States lack the revenue, infrastructure, and incentives to properly promote basic research on their own, especially with federal policies that limit collaboration, impede their funding, and fail to provide guidelines for moving with research. They also state that there's a lot of private funding for our stem cell research, but the Michigan Citizen for Stem Cell Research and Cures Center, they say that the advantage of federal funding for stem cell research are twofold. First, federal funding will allow more scientists, including our nation's most prominent researchers, to conduct this critical research, which will hasten the discoveries of therapies. Second, federal funding will ensure public oversight and accountability among researchers receiving federal grants. They will be required to adhere to strict guidelines that do not govern private sector research. They will also be required to make their results public. And then an article labeled "Private versus Public Funding." It talks about how we pay for science with taxpayers' money so that we can have standards, accountability, and fixed, transparent budgets, ethical regulations, and so on. That's why you can't leave research to the private sector. You won't know what the hell is going on with it. They also state that the federal restrictions on funding have created a stem cell revolution. However, federal restrictions on stem cell research have actually hurt the science. There needs to be a national funding for stem cell research rather than from state and private. Jonathan D. Moreno, in his article of analysis of state and federal funding for stem cell research, states that our national stem cell policy forces states to waste money building new laboratories and purchasing new equipment. So far, states have only spent a paltry 15% of their funding on actual research, and even through infrastructure costs increase over time, states will spend at least 29% of their money on infrastructure, equipment, and other non-research expenditures through 2018. He states that allowing states to drive stem cell research also means that each state will develop its own research standards, potentially leading to a patchwork of quote regulations. Allowing states to drive stem cell research also means that each state will develop its own research standards, potentially leading to patchwork. States also have less incentive to coordinate research support, which will cause research overlap and waste. And states will likely spend more on research expecting to yield quick returns, not the basic research that is needed to advance in the field. The United States is also falling behind the embryonic stem cell research because of the lack of federal funding. The Stanford University has an article stating that there's a gap between publications from U.S. and non-U.S. groups. Jennifer McCormick, a postdoctoral fellow in the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics, who completed her doctorate, states that with the current trajectory, if things don't change, then the gap's going to continue. She and her fellow named McCormick collaborated on studies with Jason Owen Smith, assistant professor of sociology and organizational studies at Stanford University. The pair found that 132 published articles between November 1998 and December 2004 relied on human embryonic stem cells, and that only 10 of those published articles were actually from the United States. And by 2004, if this gap keeps continuing, U.S. groups accounted for will only be 1/4 of the 77 publications that are out that will future be published. They also state that many sciences have been successfully researched without federal funding, but national funding for sciences is necessary for results. The Democratic Policy Committee has an article saying that support for medical research is an expression of Americans' finest values. By endorsing open scientific inquiry, and providing federal support and oversight of medical research, we demonstrate our commitment to alleviating human suffering and extending life. Our past support and investment in medical research have yielded many successes. The development of vaccines, the discovery of antibiotics and breakthrough pharmaceuticals, and the emergence of biotechnology. The next best hope for medical breakthrough is regenerative medicine, which would use embryonic stem cells to grow customized cells and tissues that could repair damages or diseased organs. Although private sectors fund research for stem cells, it is the federal restrictions that deter the stem cell research growth. President Bush's policy impeding the search for cures, the great promise of embryonic stem cells research may not be fulfilled if current restrictions are not lifted. Under the President's policy, federal funds cannot be used to support research on embryonic stem cells, on stem cell lines formed after August 9, 2001. Pure stem cell lines meet this criterion that the British administration once claimed, and its arbitrary cutoff date excludes newer and more promising stem cell lines from federal research funds. The stem cell lines that are eligible for federal support research are older and of lower quality than stem cells created since August 2001 and are likely to be contaminated because they were grown with mouse feeder cells, which will seriously limit the future use of therapies.